Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and this is video number 5, if my count's correct. I think it is, in our review and response and refutation of the book by Mr. Kyle Pope entitled Thinking About AD 70. The book was written in 2019. I only recently heard about the book, and I was asked by some different people that I would give it some thought. And so I'm more than happy to do so. Now, over the last 2 videos at least, I've been focused on Deuteronomy chapter 32. And that's because at the very first of the book, Mr. Pope spends considerable time trying to refute the idea that the Song of Moses is truly about Israel's last days. Now, what's interesting about it, he does a couple of different things. Number one, he employs a hermeneutical fallacy of going to other passages where the term akarit, Hebrew term for last end, latter end, later, whatever, and he finds context in which it's not referring to eschatology. And he says, see, over here in Proverbs, over here in Psalms, it's not talking about the last days. It's not talking about eschatology, and it's not talking about AD 70. Therefore, Deuteronomy 32, when it uses akarit, it can't be talking about eschatology, and it cannot be talking about AD 70. Folks, that's an illegitimate hermeneutic. Listen, consistency of language is very important, okay? When you find a word used consistently over and over and over again, then it certainly points us in the direction of definition. But, once again, you don't find a definition of a word, and that definition violates your eschatology or your theology in some other area, and then run over to other passages unrelated to the context that you're dealing with, and you find that word used in number one, in a different context, speaking about different things, unrelated things, and you say, see, it's not talking about eschatology here, therefore it can't be talking about eschatology there. Well, once again, ladies and gentlemen, that's a misguided hermeneutic. It just doesn't work. Secondly, however, interestingly enough, Mr. Pope admits that Deuteronomy chapter 32 did apply and was applied even by Jesus to the first century generation of the Jews. Well, ask yourself the question, was the first century generation of the Jews last days? Well, even Mr. Pope believes that it was. Mr. Pope believes that, number one, the law of Moses, which was obviously inclusive of Deuteronomy 32, he believes the law of Moses ended at the cross. Well, okay, then the cross was the last days of Israel. But you see, that won't work with Deuteronomy 32, as we're about to see. But then, Mr. Pope even says this, on page 21, we can acknowledge that the conditions of rebellion described in the song, Deuteronomy 32, especially, his italics, his emphasis, especially apply to first century Judaism without trying to limit its focus to specific events of AD 70. Well, listen, nobody's saying that the rebellion was AD 70 specifically. Everyone is saying, or preterists are saying, that the rebellion foretold in Deuteronomy 32 led to AD 70. So you see, that's a slight word play on words that's a little bit disingenuous. But if the rebellion, by the way, if the rebellion took place after the cross, and if that rebellion that took place after the cross is what the song foretold, then guess what? Mr. Pope's paradigm goes up in flames. Now look, I was raised as a fifth generation member of the churches of Christ, of which Mr. Pope is a member. I used to believe firmly that the law was nailed to the cross, that God was through with Israel at the cross. But I'm sorry. If God was through with Israel at the cross, then there's nothing in the law that was being fulfilled after the cross. Which brings us to this. In Deuteronomy 32:43, and remember, 3 times in the song we are told that it was speaking about the last days of Israel, a time far off, many generations to come. 3 times, ladies and gentlemen. That's not accidental. It's not coincidental. So, in the song, which Mr. Pope admits may be applied especially to the first century, and we add to events after the cross, that admission is a fatal admission for Mr. Pope's paradigm. So, in the song, 3 times, we're told it's about Israel's last days and the time to come, her last fate. In Deuteronomy 32:43, notice that it says, "Rejoice, O Gentiles, with the people." Now, the Gentiles would rejoice with Israel. In my last video, I pointed out that Paul applied that passage in Romans 15:10 to his ministry of converting the Gentiles into the promises of Israel. Well, if Paul applied Deuteronomy 32:43 to events taking place in his ministry after the cross, then the law of Moses, i.e. the song, was not nailed to the cross. Period. End of story. But we're not done. "Rejoice, O Gentiles, with my people, for the Lord will avenge the blood of his saints." So here we have the promise that in Israel's last days, God would avenge the blood of the martyrs. Now, in his book, Mr. Pope wants to argue, and argues, that, well, in 2 Kings chapter 7, you have God avenging the blood of his prophets. Fine enough. As I have shared with you, the ancient rabbis, the ancient Jews, applied the song to this period, that period. But they also realized, and they taught, that the song ultimately pointed to Israel's final end. It wasn't simply an unending story. And remember, Mr. Pope agrees. The song found its final fulfillment in the first century. He just fails to acknowledge that it was fulfilled after the cross, which is fatal to his theology. So I want to take a look. And look, I could go on and on and on about this concept of the avenging of the blood of the martyrs. You need to get a copy of my book, Who Is This Babylon?, for an in-depth study of that. Also, Sam Dawson has written a really excellent book on the book of Revelation. You know, it's from Genesis to Revelation. And he focuses on the avenging of the blood of the martyrs. That united, that bloody red thread that runs from Genesis 4 all the way to Revelation. And Dawson does a fantastic job of tying it all together, showing us that Revelation is the capstone of that issue, showing us that the blood of the martyrs was avenged in AD 70. That book is available from me. It's on my website. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, and go to the store and look up Sam Dawson, and it's his book on Revelation. So, and of course, my book on Babylon is there as well. So avail yourself of those resources. Obviously, the subject of the avenging of the martyrs is far too vast to cover in one or even two video lessons. I'm already at 10 minutes, so I've got to hurry. So here we have, one more time, the song promising that in Israel's last days, God would avenge the blood of the saints. I want you to go with me to Isaiah chapter 26 and 27. Now, technically, we ought to be dealing with Isaiah 24 through 27 or 28, what is known as, in scholarly literature, the Little Apocalypse. In Isaiah 24 through 27 and 28, we have a set of prophecies. We have texts that Jesus and the New Testament writers quote over and over and over again and apply those prophecies to the events that were taking place in their day, their time, their generation, and after the cross. Remember that, after the cross. Well, Isaiah 25, 6 to 8 foretold the Messianic banquet when Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would sit down in the kingdom. I know that's talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob because Matthew chapter 8, verse 11 applies Isaiah 25, verse 6. He references it directly. Isaiah 25, verse 8, the prophecy of the resurrection. Catch this, catch the power of this. Paul said the resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15 would be the fulfillment of Isaiah 25, verse 8. Okay, wait a minute. If the old law, if the Old Testament was done away, nailed to the cross, how could Paul be looking for the fulfillment of Isaiah 25, verse 8 at some ostensible, imaginary end of time? If Isaiah 25, verse 8 will not be fulfilled until the so-called end of time, that means Isaiah, part of the Old Testament, will remain valid and binding until the end of time. Not one jot, not one tittle of the law or the prophets would pass until it was all fulfilled. So Isaiah 26 then predicts the resurrection also. Verse 19, your dead shall live. Together with my dead body they shall rise. Awake and sing, those of you who dwell in the dust. For your dew is like the dew of herbs, and the earth shall cast out the dead. Now watch this. Verse 21, I got to hurry. For behold, the Lord comes out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity. The earth will disclose her blood and will no more cover her stain. Resurrection, coming of the Lord, avenging of the blood of the martyrs. Look, all commentators who comment on this agree this is the avenging of the blood of the martyrs. So we have the coming of the Lord, the resurrection, and the avenging of the blood of the martyrs. Wait a minute. Deuteronomy 32, the Lord will avenge the blood of his saints. By the way, if you have access to it, you can look it up on the internet. Meredith Kline, great scholar, wrote a fantastic article on these chapters. Now watch, chapter 27. In that day, the Lord with his severe sword, great and strong, will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, that twisted serpent, and he will slay the reptile that is in the sea. What is this? It's the destruction of Satan, the great serpent. Revelation chapter 12. You know, the great serpent, the great persecutor of God's people. You know, the one who made the martyrs. Notice this term, in that day. What's the antecedent? The day of the resurrection, the day of the coming of the Lord, the day of the avenging of the martyrs. In that day, Satan, the great serpent, would be destroyed. Oh, but that's not all. In that day, destruction of Satan, sing to her a vineyard of red wine. Who is the Lord's vineyard? Israel. Isaiah chapter 5. when we follow this terminology of in that day, it ties this entire discourse together. It is inseparable. Now, got to go on here. Isaiah ponders, has he, that's Yahweh, struck Israel as he struck those who struck him? Or has he, Israel, been slain according to the slaughter of those who were slain by him? Answer, in measure, by sending it away. You, that's Yahweh, contended with it. He, Yahweh, removes it by his rough wind in the day of the east wind. In the day of the east wind. Therefore, watch this, by what? Captivity. Bondage. By this, folks, you gotta catch this. I understand this is difficult sometimes for us to catch. Israel's salvation would come through Israel's judgment. Israel's salvation, i.e. the salvation of the remnant, would come at the time of the judgment of the nation, is another way to put it. Anyway, by this, the iniquity of Jacob will be covered, and this is the fruit of the taking away of his sin. Now, God pointed this out in Romans chapter 11, 25 to 27, when Paul anticipated the coming salvation of Israel, which is what this is talking about, and that salvation would be at the coming of the Lord out of Zion. It would be in fulfillment of Isaiah 27, verse 9. The coming of the Lord for the salvation of Israel of Romans 11, 25 to 27, would be fulfillment of Isaiah 27. But wait, Paul was still looking for that salvation of Israel, and that salvation would be, listen carefully, catch the power of this, for this what? The salvation of Israel at the coming of the Lord. For this is my covenant with them when I take away their sin. Isaiah 26, the coming of the Lord, resurrection, avenging of the martyrs. Romans chapter 11, the coming of the Lord, salvation of Israel. Oh, and Romans is about the vindication of the martyr, or contains that motif. So here's Paul, well after the cross, anticipating the fulfillment of Isaiah 27. So once again, if the law, if the old covenant was nailed to the cross, how could Paul be anticipating the fulfillment of God's covenant with Israel at the coming of the Lord? See, it doesn't work, does it? We continue. Got to hurry. Therefore, by this the iniquity of Jacob will be covered. This is all the fruit of taking away a sin. When would this salvation of Israel at the coming of the Lord, the resurrection, the avenging of the blood, when would that be? When he makes all the stones of the altar like chalk stones that are beaten to dust. Wooden images and incense and altars shall not stand. Yet the fortified city will be desolate. The habitation forsaken and left like a wilderness. There, let me skip. Let me skip down. 4. Here's the reason why the temple would be destroyed, the altar turned to chalk stone, the city, the fortified city, destroyed, no flocks, no food, etc. 4, this is where Deuteronomy 32 comes in. 4, it is a people of no understanding. Whoop, stop, time out. That is a direct citation of Deuteronomy 32, verse 18. And by the way, virtually all commentators agree to that. Quick digression. Many commentators, unable to escape the force of this, say, well, you see, Isaiah 26 and 27 is talking about either the Assyrian captivity, it's talking about the impending Assyrian invasion of Israel. And they say that, well, you know, this is talking about the idols being destroyed. And idols weren't destroyed in AD 70. Well, yeah, they were actually. But nonetheless, here's the problem. Jerusalem was not destroyed by the Assyrians. The temple was not destroyed by the Assyrians. All you got to do is read Isaiah 30 to 37 to know that. This is not a prediction of the Assyrian invasion, period. And after all, it's a prediction of the resurrection at the coming of the Lord for the avenging the martyrs. In fulfillment of the song of Moses, for it is a people of no understanding. Therefore, the one who made them, that is Israel, right? That's the people that were created. Therefore, the one who made them will not have mercy on them. The one who formed them will show them no favor. And it shall come to pass in that day. What day? Destruction of Jerusalem. Coming of the Lord. Resurrection. Avenging of the martyrs. Destruction of Satan. Hey, when does the destruction of Satan take place? Well, let's see. Paul said in Romans 16:20, and now the God of peace will avenge or will crush Satan, that's the great dragon, under your feet shortly. Pay careful attention to my morning musings because I'm about to get to Romans 16:20 in my examination of the Greek term entakai. So here's Paul considering the destruction of Satan and said it was going to take place soon, shortly. Oh, and Revelation 20 puts the destruction of Satan when? Coming of the Lord, the judgment, the resurrection, and the avenging of the blood of the martyrs. That's when Satan would be destroyed. It shall come to pass in that day. Remember, this is the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. In that day, the Lord will thresh from the channel of the river to the brook of Egypt, and you shall be gathered one by one, O ye children of Israel. This is the salvation of the remnant. So it shall be in that day, the great trumpet will be blown. They will come who are about to perish in the land of Assyria. Well, guess what? On the day of Pentecost, there were Jews, devout Jews, proselytes, out of every nation under heaven. There's the beginning of the gathering. But Jesus had something to say about the gathering at the sound of the trumpet, didn't he? In his discussion of the destruction of Jerusalem to avenge the blood of the martyrs, to destroy the persecutor of his people, Jesus said, they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. The Son of Man will send forth his angels with the sound of the great trumpet. Folks, that's a direct echo of Isaiah 27, verse 13. Now, when did Jesus say that his coming, with the angels, with a shout, with the sounding of the trumpet to gather together the elect, would be? Matthew 24:34. Verily I say unto you, this generation, that's his generation, will by no means pass away until all of these things are fulfilled. Well, wait a minute. What did Jesus say in Matthew 23? Oh, wait. All of the blood of all of the righteous shed upon the earth, from righteous Abel unto Zacharias, son of Barachias, whom you slew between the temple and the altar, will be required of this generation. I mean, how many times does Jesus have to say this generation for us to pay attention and to honor his word? So what do we have? We have Deuteronomy 32:43 saying that in Israel's last days, at the time of the end, God would avenge the blood of the martyrs. we have Isaiah 26 and 27 saying that at the time of the resurrection, at the coming of the Lord, at the destruction of Satan, at the time of the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, the blood of the martyrs would be avenged, and it would be in that day that Deuteronomy 32 and 18 would be fulfilled. And we have Jesus in Matthew 23 and 24 saying that all of the blood of all of the righteous from Abel onward. Do you suppose that includes those that Isaiah 26 and 27 are talking about? If not, why not? Where's the proof? Pretty comprehensive, isn't it? All the blood of all the righteous from Abel onward. So we have Jesus promising. And by the way, when did Jesus appear? Oh, in the last days, Hebrews 1. So he appeared at the time foretold by Deuteronomy 32. He foretold the very things foretold by Deuteronomy 32. And he said those things would be fulfilled in his generation. I'm out of time, but let me make this final point. The book of Revelation is about the avenging of the blood of the martyrs. Revelation 6, 9 and following. I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been beheaded for the word of God and for their testimony. And they cried out, "How long, O Lord, do you not avenge us on those who dwell on the earth?" They were given white robes and told to rest for a little while. Not 2,000 years, not 3,000, not 4,000, and not 500. Until the number of their fellow brethren who should be slain as they were should be fulfilled. When did Jesus say that all of the blood of all the martyrs would be filled up? Oh, Matthew 23, 29 and following. Fill up then the measure of your father's guilt. And in the destruction of Babylon, Revelation 18, Revelation chapter 19 sings the song of victory. And it speaks of the righteousness of God, how his salvation had come because you have avenged the blood of your saints. A direct echo of Deuteronomy 32, 43. Who is Babylon? Oh, the city where the Lord was crucified. The city that Jesus said was guilty of all of the blood shed on the earth. The city guilty of killing his apostles and prophets. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, there's simply no way in this world to argue that the Song of Moses, the law of Moses, was nailed to the cross. When Isaiah 26 and 27, posits the fulfillment of Deuteronomy 32, at the time of the coming of the Lord, the resurrection and the avenging of the martyrs and the destruction of Satan, at the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, and when Jesus posits those events at the exact same precise time and says it would be in his generation after the cross, then the law of Moses was not nailed to the cross. Okay. Get a copy of my book, Who is This Babylon? Get a copy of Sam Dawson's book on Revelation. It's that thick, and it's a discussion of the vindication of the martyrs. You'll love it. You'll appreciate it. So go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com, and order either one or both. You order both books, and I'll pay your shipping. All right? How's that? Thanks for joining me this Friday for this morning musings. Have a safe weekend. I'll see you on Monday.